Madam President, we will begin a couple of hours of debate on this resolution prior to a vote that I understand is scheduled around 6 or maybe a little bit thereafter. And I rise to talk about the resolution for the second time in the last week, and I needn't repeat all the points that I made when I spoke about it last week. But I'll just begin with this. I came to the Senate in January of 2013, and I tell people that I came with 100 interests and 10 passions and 1 obsession. And the obsession that I brought with me to this body was an obsession that I would do everything possible I could to stop the United States from getting into an unnecessary war. Why did I bring that obsession with me in 2013? I brought it with me because of the experience in Virginia during 2 wars over the course of 20 years, from 2001 to 2021. I was governor of Virginia from 2006 to 2010. I was lieutenant governor of Virginia before that. And like every state in this country, Virginia was deeply, deeply affected by the global war on terror. When I was governor of Virginia, I had the honor and responsibility, but it was also a burden, of being the commander-in-chief of the Virginia National Guard. And that meant that I was with our guardsmen and women when they deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, when they came home. I went to funerals, I went to wakes. These were very, very moving experiences. I visited, as governor, our troops, our guardsmen and women in both Iraq and Afghanistan during that period where the war was at a huge upsurge. Thousands of Virginia guardsmen and women were deployed during those 4 years. And of course, because of who Virginia is, it wasn't just our guardsmen and women, it was also our active duty, our DOD civilians from other parts of the federal family, reservists, military contractors, DOD civilians and their families. The cost of that 20 years of war on Virginia was very heavy. And I came with the obsession not only because of what I had seen in terms of the effect of these wars on my Commonwealth and my country, the deaths, the injuries, the long-standing mental health needs, the tremendous expenditure of public treasure, the lack of clear and positive results from that 20 years. But I also came with an obsession on this topic because of watching the way the war started, particularly the war in Iraq. The United States was basically, the public and this body was basically lied to about the extent of the Iraqi program of weapons of mass destruction. And then an administration forced a vote on the floor of this body right before a midterm election. The debate and vote occurred in October of 2022. I remember at the time I was lieutenant governor and I was paying attention to this, and I thought, what's the urgency about this debate in October of 22, right before a midterm election? You might remember the United States didn't even invade Iraq until March of 2023. There was no urgency. There was none. But it was determined to be politically expedient to force a debate before a midterm election to try to give one party an edge in those midterms. Yeah, there was a vote, but it was timed and structured for political rather than military reasons, and thousands of Americans, both soldiers and contractors, lost their lives as a result. And so I came to this body fully believing that, yes, I'm only one of 100, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure the United States doesn't get into an unnecessary war, and that if the issue ever arises, Congress needs to fully debate any military mission before we send our sons and daughters into war. Now, Madam President, I say this as a senator from, I'm going to argue this, and the president will challenge me on this, but I'm going to say Virginia is the most pro-military state in the United States. Our military bases, our veterans population, our reservists, our Guard, our military families, our DOD civilians, our map is a map of American military history. Yorktown, Appomattox, the Wilderness, Fredericksburg, 9/11 attack on the Pentagon. Everything about Virginia is connected to our nation's military mission. I know the president would make the same claim about Florida's connection to our military, and this would be a virtuous competition as we would all talk about how pro-military our states are, but I believe this deeply about Virginia. My dad was an Army officer. One of my kids is a Marine officer. I mean, this is family, and I'm connected deeply as a member of the Armed Services Committee to all of our military community. And I'm not a pacifist. Every year I work on the Armed Services Committee to help write a defense bill and try to get it passed. I whip votes on the floor for military aid packages to allies. There's bad folks in the world. The United States needs to defend itself, and it needs to work with allies to help them defend themselves. But our troops, our sons and daughters, deserve to have wise civilian leadership that only make the decision to send them into war on the basis of careful consideration and a debate before the entire public. The other night when I spoke on the floor, I pointed out the history of the way the framers of our Constitution grappled with this question in 1787. And to just make it simple, they decided, contrary to the history of the world and the way virtually every other country did it, they decided that war was too big a decision for one person. I mean, they were making this decision at the time that George Washington was president. He was very respected and admired. He was a wartime general, deeply respected. But as much as they respected leaders like George Washington, they said, war's too big a decision. It's too big a decision for one person. And so they wrote a constitution that said the United States should not be at war without a vote of Congress. Defense against an attack or an imminent attack, yes, the president as commander-in-chief has the power to do that. But to go on offense against another nation or an entity like a terrorist group, and there were terrorist groups back in the days like the Barbary Coast Pirates. From the very beginning, we have confronted threats not just by nation states but by others. But the decision was, it was too big a decision for any one person, and we should only go to war after a debate, not only in Congress, where we put our thumbprint on this is a national mission, we're risking our sons and daughters' lives for, we have a debate in front of the entire public so they can understand the stakes. War is too big for any one person. I think the events of this week have demonstrated that war is too big to be consigned to the decisions of any one person. Our current commander-in-chief, on his social media account a day or two after the attack in Iran, put up a music video with lyrics that were matched to a Beach Boys song, Barbara Ann, but the music video contained these lyrics: bomb, bomb, Iran, bomb, 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 Iran, went to a mosque, gonna throw some rocks, time to turn Iran into a parking lot. We shouldn't premise a decision to send our sons and daughters into war on the judgment of a single person. The president patted himself on the back and he compared the attack to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That was a most unusual comparison. I haven't put all the lyrics of the song up on my chart. One of the other lyrics was about sending the Ayatollah home in a box. I mean, is this some kind of a joke? Is this the way we treat war now? Like we run a victory lap and we overstate it and we turn it into a funny music video, or we use a Hiroshima and Nagasaki comparison as if that's like a good thing? War is too big to leave the decision to send our sons and daughters and risk their lives on the say-so of one person. We had some turmoil this week in the Senate. We were going to have a briefing on Tuesday that they had to, from the national security officials of the administration, they had to postpone it till Thursday because they were fighting with themselves and they were fighting with reporters about intelligence that had come out that the president wasn't happy about. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, he said that the Iranian nuclear program had been completely obliterated. All sources, Iranian sources, Israeli sources, the IAEA, the United States, have said severe damage. But because the president sort of went overboard with the Hiroshima and Nagasaki claims and completely obliterated, reporters started to dig into it. And then the president got mad, and then his Secretary of Defense started to name-call reporters who were asking basic questions, war is too big an issue to leave to the moods and the whims and the daily vibes of any one person. And that's why the founder said, unless it's an imminent defense, and in this case it wasn't, the Israeli foreign minister had said before the U.S. attack that their attacks had already set the Iranian program back at least 2 or 3 years. That's a direct quote from the Israelis who follow this very closely. If the program had been set back at least 2 or 3 years, what was the urgency that suggested we needed to take this action without a debate in Congress? And Madam President, it was not only done without congressional authorization, it was also done without congressional consultation, and it was done without congressional notification of Democratic leaders. Republican leaders were given a briefing, but for the first time during my time here, no Democrat in a leadership position on the key committees was given an advance notice of this. Is war now to be a partisan thing, where the White House just notifies those of the same party? I've tried to be consistent about this, Madam President. When I came to the Senate in 2013 with this passion that I'm going to do anything I can to stop an unnecessary war, within a few months after arriving here, President Obama, who is a personal friend, was contemplating military action in Syria. And I looked my friend in the eye and I said, you do not have congressional authority to do that. You need to bring this to Congress. Hey, I thought you were my supporter. I thought you were my friend and you would support this. I do support you, and I think you have good judgment, and I think you're likely to make a careful decision, but war is too big an issue to leave in the hands of even a completely careful and deliberative individual. The framers didn't want to leave war in the hands of George Washington, for God's sake. They thought Congress should be involved in it. And I said to President Obama, you need to bring this to Congress. And guess what? A lot of members of this body said the same thing. 7 members in the Senate right now were in the House in 2013. And I have a letter that many of them wrote. 6 members who are currently Republican members of the Senate signed this. August 28, 2013, dear Mr. President, we strongly urge you to consult and receive authorization from Congress before ordering the use of U.S. military force in Syria. Your responsibility to do so is prescribed in the Constitution and the War Powers Resolution of 1973. We were in a recess then, it was August. But they said, if you deem that military action is necessary, Congress can reconvene at your request. We stand ready to come back into session, consider the facts before us, and share the burden of decisions regarding U.S. involvement in the quickly escalating Syrian conflict. 6 Republican members of this body signed that letter in 2013, but based on their public statements, they seem to have a different standard for President Trump than they did for President Obama, a different standard for war against Iran than they did for war against Syria. There's one member who signed this letter who is consistent. Congressman Peter Welch is now in the Senate. He signed this letter to a president of his own party saying you can't do this without a vote of Congress. Come to Congress. And he is taking the same position on the floor today consistently that he did then. Madam President, I'm going to conclude and just say this. I know everybody in this body is praying that the ceasefire that is in place now for a couple of days works and that it holds. I know everybody is praying that when the administration now says they're interested in a diplomatic resolution to this program, that they will have learned that they shouldn't tear up diplomatic deals as they did in 2018, but instead should prefer diplomacy and step back from war against Iran. I pray that that holds and that we won't need to be back here doing this again, but I do note that the president, even today, said he would certainly bomb Iran again. I'm hoping, I'm realistic, but I'm hoping that members of this body will stand up for the Constitution, will stand up for the proposition that war is too big to be decided by one person, will stand up for the principles that they articulated pretty clearly when it came to President Obama thinking about taking war into Syria. At that moment, when we urged President Obama to do that, he didn't use military force. He did bring it to Congress. We had a debate in the Foreign Relations Committee. We passed an authorization, and in that debate, Syria stepped forward and said they would give up their chemical weapons program. Diplomacy achieved a result. Just as diplomacy achieved a more effective control of the Iranian nuclear program, even than the bombs that we dropped last Saturday until it was torn up. I pray the ceasefire continues, but I fear we're going to be back here on this floor. And I hope when we are on this floor again, members of this body will stand for the proposition that has been part of our history, that war is too big an issue to allow one person to make the decision that sends our sons and daughters into harm's way. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor.